so much for being here. Can I get a round of applause for TJ on the keys? Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm always told to find my light. Yeah, there we go. Okay, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Maureen Cool, and welcome to Show Up Chicago. Thank you all for showing up. I am very grateful to, on behalf of my pals here at Blue Beginnings and Indivisible, I'm very excited to welcome you here tonight. And we are, of course, very grateful to The Hideout for hosting us. Give it up for The Hideout. Whether this is your first time or you are a returner, we are so glad you're here. And one more thing about The Hideout, please see the bar and please tip your bartenders. They are doing wonderful work, yes, all night. Thank you so much. Alrighty, so before we get into this month's topic, we took last month off, and we hope that you are all enjoying and have enjoyed a wonderful Chicago summertime. The groans are already starting. Unfortunately, it does seem that this administration continues to be obsessed with what it cannot control and launched Operation Midway Blitz at the beginning of September. We have, even as recent as this week, learned from Governor Pritzker that Homeland Security asked the Department of Defense to send 100 troops to Illinois to protect, seemingly, them from themselves. This is, I want to say, as I'm up here to kind of lighten the mood and set the table, it is difficult to talk about because this is a perfect example of how unserious and stupid seeming the Trump administration can be when it comes to implementing their agenda. And yet, yes, it is incredibly serious for our neighbors, so we want to make sure to point that out. Operation Midway Blitz is a plan that the federal government says is an effort to crack down on immigration enforcement in Chicago and Illinois, but I personally think it instead sounds like what happens when you can't get a flight out of O'Hare at Christmas time, am I right?
Federal agents were spotted aboard boats on the Chicago River. Sunday was the first time we saw such a show of force downtown. Behind me is Michigan Avenue, and this portion of Michigan Avenue is one of the locations agents were on patrol. Scenes like these were what people downtown saw Sunday afternoon. Agents in military fatigues were near the Wrigley Building, Millennium Park. They were also on the Riverwalk in the Gold Coast and on Clark Street in River North.
So in case you guys didn't hear that, it sounds like they were at the Wrigley Building, Millennium Park, Clark Street, and River North. I'm really glad that they get to see the big, bad, beautiful city that Chicago really is. And hey, everyone, we can make sure that they add Lower Wacker Drive to their list, so then they'll be lost for the next month. Also, before we move on from this, can we just take a look at how he got in the bike lane before he took off? That's Chicago, baby. Okay, so again, like I said, this is tough. This is a tough conversation, and we want to try to find hope in this time, but we also acknowledge that unlawful behavior from ICE agents in our city is happening. We know a lot of you were here for our conversation in July about how to protect our neighbors from ICE, but given the state of our city, we want to make sure that we reshare this hotline so that if you know someone that needs assistance or you want to report an ICE sighting, please take a picture of this or write it down. We shared this last month or in July, but I will also have this afterwards if anyone else needs it.
Say the number for the radio.
For the radio, 855-435-7693. Thank you, radio. All right. Speaking of hope, the Cubs are going to the playoffs. Okay. No. Recently, the Chicago City Council unanimously passed a sweeping zoning reform that eliminates parking mandates for most residential and commercial development in the city. So this is what we're going to talk about tonight. In case you missed it, I said unanimously, which is wild for a city that can't agree on whether we should call it pop or soda. Thank you. Under this new ordinance, developers are no longer required to provide any off-street parking in transit-served locations in most districts. Given our transportation network, much of the city is covered. This is a win for expanding affordable housing, and that's great. However, we are still struggling as a city. The cost of living is going up, and the shortage makes competition tight. So, we here at Show Up Chicago got reflecting on the fact that we might be a little helpless federally, but why can't we take care of Chicago and Illinois locally on a survival level? We love Chicago because it's a big, diverse city full of life, and you can afford to live here if we keep it that way. So Marge and Tom are going to give them their full proper introductions, but we are so excited to dive into this topic with Richard Day and Andre Vasquez, and they're going to share more about how we got here and what we can do moving forward. So really quick, before I have them come up on stage, I have to say tonight's panel is recorded for a podcast and radio show. The time is tight, and so are our microphones. Marge and Tom will conduct the panel up here. We will not be able to have any questions during the panel. Once the panel ends, then we will have a Q&A. We ask that if you have a question for our panelists, in order to make best use of their time, to think about your question beforehand and make it short. If you can, please write your question out, and I will prioritize those questions when we get to the Q&A. If you need something to write on, we do have note cards out in the bar area. Thank you all so much for being here. Without further ado, Marge and Tom, take it away.
Be prepared to the right page here. Welcome to Show Up Chicago. How great to see such a packed room. This is a community gathering and political panel show presented monthly here at the Hideout. I'm Tom Moss with Marge Halpern. We're part of the leadership team for Indivisible Blue Beginning.
First, I do want to pick up a little bit where Maureen left off, because we are more than aware of the horror that is happening around us in our city, in our region, and I think Maureen gave us a pretty good summary of it. It's okay that we got a couple minutes of fun out of that little bike video, right? We needed just a little humor, a little lightness, but it's a heavy topic for sure. None of us are fooled or distracted by that. We know that you will all stay focused on your resistance work, as will we, and we're grateful for everything that the folks who join us on Show Up Chicago are doing. But that is not our topic for tonight. We don't put these shows together as a way to chase the day's headlines. If so, we'd have had to just revamp this show in the last couple hours when the news about the new military deployment is just broke. So we're not doing that, but we do hope to build on the work to save our democracy by helping shape ideas and policies that can improve life in our community. Because we often talk about what progressives will do when we are back in power, but we do have power now, and there's so much we can do to improve life in our communities. It'll be a bonus to be better informed when we have national power, which I do believe we will, to make government work better for people.
Amen. And just picking up on that last point about government, it's good to remember that one of the purposes of government is to make life better for people. We lose track of that sometimes. So tonight's conversation, like all of them here at Show Up Chicago, is framed to identify ways that Democrats and progressives can demonstrate that we're not just the goodies, that we can actually get things done. We haven't done so great at that. I think we might be able to agree, but we need to do better. So we're discussing the housing crisis, which isn't unique to Chicago, but it seems like a good place to start, and there's already stuff happening to make lives better for citizens of Chicago. So joining us to get a handle on this crisis is Richard Day. He's a former policy staffer in the mayor's office, writes A City That Works, which is a Substack blog analyzing housing, transit, and governance. And Andre Vasquez, Chicago's 40th Ward alderperson. He's a son of Guatemalan immigrants, former hip-hop artist and organizer. And you got a microphone there.
It is true. That's factual.
Maybe. Now he is a leader on the Council on Immigrant Rights, Transportation, and other issues. Definitely a goodie, helping make Chicago a better place to live. So let's welcome our guests, please.
So there isn't anyone, certainly nobody in this room, who would disagree that Chicago has a housing crisis. Let's talk about what that means, first of all. There are at least 3 levels that I can think of to this problem, and we'll try to get to all of them, and maybe you've got others who disagree with mine. First of all, there's certainly a shortage of affordable housing for people with limited means, no doubt about that. But there are also families who own homes that have devalued so much that they're stuck. They can't move to a more comfortable home or more comfortable community because they can't sell the home that is worth less than they paid for it. At the same time, there's a shortage of options for those who can afford a new home but still face a lot of competition to secure it. And so whichever level it is, our housing situation is tight, uncomfortable, not working. Did I leave out any categories?
The unhoused, right? So that's even more challenging because there's no profit margin in establishing housing for the unhoused. And so, yeah, that's a layer as well that we've got to work on.
And the relationship between a housing shortage and homelessness, I mean, it's directly correlated. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a medical bill away, right, depending on somebody's situation. And so making sure that you create the kind of system that can provide housing for all, for everybody who needs it, is ultimately the gold standard. It's the goal for all of us.
I think one way to think about that sometimes is to think about housing like a game of musical chairs, like the world's worst game of musical chairs. And if there are fewer chairs than there are people when the music stops, some people will get those chairs faster, right? They're bigger, they're stronger, they have more resources, right? And the folks who are going to be without a chair are going to be folks with a disability, folks who aren't as strong, folks who aren't as able, folks who might be very young or very old. But the problem is there isn't enough chairs at the end of the day. And if there's enough chairs, we have a way of caring for folks who need more help, who need more support, who need city subsidies to help carry some of that burden. But in a world of scarcity, the folks who will be at the bottom of any one of those games are the folks with the worst, with the most limited other resources. And it's a mistake, I think, to say, oh, it's mental illness, oh, it's drug addiction, oh, it's something. Well, the states with some of the highest rates of drug addiction, or West Virginia, Mississippi, they don't have homeless crises anywhere near high-cost states on the coasts.
Well, it seems like the solutions to these different sectors might be different, but the way you describe it, they're really interconnected and related, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to think about the fact that, again, one accident can just change what tier or status you're at. And he's absolutely right. If you don't have enough stock and not enough housing, period, then you're increasing your homelessness. And now you're increasing the amount of costs that you have to address it with. And now you have less funds to work in government. So the whole thing is it's a spirals if you're not addressing it proactively.
And do we think the housing shortage is about 120 units? Is it 120,000 units? Is that the number we're using, or is it more than that?
I think that was the number 4 years ago.
When I started writing this, the city papers said 100,000, the DOH study. Now it's at least 120, and it's
Could
going
be
in the wrong
140,
direction.
Yeah. So let me, and this is a stupid question, just tell me we can move on, but there's a housing shortage of 120 plus units. There's also, 1,000, thank you. Oh, if only, if it was 120, right? So what is the relationship of the housing shortage and affordable housing? What exactly is affordable housing, and what are we talking about when we talk about affordable? Are we talking about SROs? Are we talking about boarding houses? I mean, what exactly is it?
I'll start and then get corrected by
It's
the
not
expert
at all.
on the city council.
At least it's not a stupid question.
Well, it's not a
No, not
stupid
at all.
question at all, and we all talk about it a little differently depending on the moment or the way we're thinking about it. So, how affordable housing is housing you can afford.
Bingo. That's what I was going to say, actually.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah.
So there's housing that you can afford, there's housing that someone else can afford, kind of situation. And then, but when we talk about housing that we think of as lower cost housing, right? Housing someone who is making less than the median income, or, significantly less than, say, the average in Chicago can afford, that really splits into 2 buckets. One is what we would call naturally occurring affordable housing, which is like the worst. It's a terrible phrase.
NOAA.
Yeah, NOAA. Right. We'll put an acronym on it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that stuff, that's the courtyard apartment that was built 60 years ago that's still pretty cheap. The landlord hasn't really cranked the rents in a while or renovated them. It's just like not that expensive. Someone's doing fine. That's the majority of our affordable housing. And then there's another set of housing, which is housing that the city has built or supported building and is deed restricted to say, hey, you have to make 60 grand or 40 grand or 50 grand a year. If you make more than that, you don't qualify for these units.
Yeah, I think typically just for like 23 years is kind of the deed. And as you might imagine, it's what everyone says. It's like $800,000 per unit. And what you're getting from that return is marginal as far as the actual unit count. So it's also just building in general, right? Because if you've got more supply, then market and competitiveness levels out some of that. But because people aren't building enough, it actually constricts the amount of supply and then shoots the cost up for everything you're trying to like rent or buy.
Yeah, to put it another way, if you can't afford to make rent in Chicago while you make 60 grand a year, which you can, people can, then the city's got to support or try to find a way to support with deed restricted affordable housing people all the way down. But instead, if you could make it fine at 60 grand a year, but you really need help if you're making 20 or 30 grand a year, all of a sudden the city funded affordable problem gets smaller and we have more resources per person to help folks at the bottom of the income distribution or who need other support.
So there are solutions. There are solutions that we're trying here in Chicago and that other cities are doing. We mentioned most recently the transit-oriented development that Maureen mentioned at the top. That did just pass with the impressive unanimous vote. So rare. But now zoning changes have long been like the third rail of Chicago politics, right? And it's tied. How did this happen given the adversity to any kind of zoning change in this city?
Okay. Neighbors. That's the reason none of this moves.
With backyards, right?
Meaning like people will often say, well, it's aldermanic prerogative, but it's actually community prerogative, right? And that is the unfortunate part. Meaning everyone wants density, they just don't want it on their block. And so now you have to deal with, like we do a community-driven zoning process. We actually let people know when there's a zoning proposal. We have a Zoom call or a meeting with all the neighbors in the area, give them a form, a survey, and then get a response back within 2 weeks, right? Neighbors don't want to go over 4 floors or 3 floors or anything over 2 floors. And so when neighbors don't want to do that, they're putting the pressure on the alderman to actually make the decision. And so I think when we hear about aldermanic prerogative, it actually avoids where the pressure is actually coming from. You're talking about elected officials who want to remain in their seats and a bunch of neighbors who are saying, how dare you? And they ask for something that is ridiculous called a sun study, where they want to find out if this building is put next to mine, how much sun is it going to block from my own place, right? It gets that ludicrous, but because they have that much sway, it causes that kind of change. Like that's ultimately, I think, the root of a lot of it.
And then if you're a good guy alderman who really believes in building more housing and taking care of our neighbors across the city, you're in this terrible trap, right? Because either you can give the 2 blocks around this development what they want and not have a problem getting reelected, or you can stand up for what you want to believe in and you're going to have a much harder time getting reelected next time.
Or you could find a way to negotiate a compromise and then everybody hates you. Yeah. It works out.
Well, if you build a big enough building with enough units, you'll have more voters there that'll support you. See?
Totally, except the turnout's the best. But yes, that'd be.
You know, I live in the South Loop, and I've been following the hearings and meetings about the new soccer stadium that's coming in my backyard, and which is fine. It's good development for the city. But I was interested in how Alderman Dowell put it, because we have concerns about the traffic patterns around the stadium. We want the stadium, but we want more thought and some changes to the traffic study that the developer selected. And what she said was, we'll continue to work with the neighbors on this, but I need to balance what's good for my ward with what's good for the city. Now, the stadium project, that's a pretty big deal, and I understand why that's good for the city. But zoning changes are good for the city, too. We have 49 other aldermen who are so locally focused, they can't say what Alderman Dowell has said and keep their job?
I think we can all say it, but I think different neighbors have different qualifications of what right looks like. So we all think about the city, right? We're looking at over $1 billion deficit every single year. So how can you not think about how you need to increase population when you think about a city that's so segregated that you've got transit deserts, which makes it harder to build in other parts of town, right? You have to think about all these things, but as many have seen, it becomes challenging when you have to have 50 people or just 26 out of the 50 agree on any one thing. I will give a quick, the parking minimum removal, I think they weren't paying attention.
I think he's right.
I think everyone was so focused on the ADU fight that it just kind of breezed on through, made it out, got voted on, because there's no other reason I could think of having a unanimous vote on something like that.
So another glimmer of hope, though, that occurred a little. No, it's a miracle.
Maybe some other stuff will get through.
So in addition to inattention, we have another glimmer of hope.
I only want to add one thing.
Yeah.
Look out for all the special parking zone stickers that you're going to have around the city now. But that'll an obvious outcome.
But I will say something else that happened a couple months ago that Alderman Vasquez led on that was really important was he got together with a couple other aldermen up on Western Avenue and said, hey, we're going to build a whole plan for a strip of Western. We're going to link arms. This is not me approving one project one time for one developer who people are going to worry is getting special favors. It's not going to turn out everybody in just the 2-block radius around that one development. We're going to go all the way up and down Western for, 4 wards or so? 4 or 5 wards?
Yeah, three.
3.
So it's 40, 47, 49.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're going to do some real planning that's going to translate into real zoning changes. And then anybody can build knowing that they've got better zoning and there's better options across that part of
That's
town.
right, kid. And the sky didn't fall. Yeah. No, and the sky didn't fall, right? You're able to proactively do it, which means a lot less zoning changes that are necessary because you've already proactively done it. And so when we looked at it, what made sense was it's Western. If you're not going to be able to do it on Western, you're not going to be able to do it anywhere. But there is a model that to follow if there's other communities where you want to upzone and say, you know what, if you want to do a 2-flat or a 3-flat, let's do that, no problem, as opposed to what was happening in the past where alders would downzone it to single family only, so you couldn't get anything above that. And that's actually what compressed a lot of the naturally affordable, natural occurring affordable housing, NOAA, in the area.
The result of that, as one of your colleagues has written in your Substack, I think it's one of Noah's, that as a result, we have zoning restrictions that don't allow building housing that we already have in the ward. So if you have 2 flats, 3 flats in some of these districts, 6 flats are old courtyard buildings and those kind of, typical Chicago buildings, because of those newer zoning rules, you can't go back and duplicate those same units.
That's right.
Couldn't we start there?
They're all referred as non-conforming, right? And so that prior to this ADU pilot expansion, because it's not full citywide ADU ordinance, all the basements are not conforming. They're illegal, right? And so none of that is helpful.
The garden apartments. you
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. None of that is helpful. None of that add to the tax rolls. None of them are actually kept up to code because they're technically not, legal. So trying to get that back on is actually what the goal was, to try to get this citywide expansion of it.
You've mentioned ADUs a couple times, and that is, for the uninformed, additional dwelling units. I've also seen accessory dwelling units, so
Accessory, yeah.
doing business as. Okay. This is, or granny flats or coach houses. These are those units in my backyard that I can either put my mother-in-law in, God forbid, or better, rent to someone that as an affordable unit. Why should I not be allowed in the house that I am paying for to do whatever the hell I want in my backyard?
Oh, you're talking to the wrong guys. We're not the ones that asked that one.
You might need to take that up with Marty Quinn.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
Unfortunately.
So what are people saying is the reason? I mean, what
Oh,
is?
yeah.
Talk about that debate.
All right. It's a lovely word called character. You're going to ruin the character of the neighborhood, which is very coded language that if you look at it historically, you know exactly what's being meant by that.
Undesirables.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And so
Not
it's like
me's.
Exactly. Like, And what's interesting to me is there was a time where it was all about how knockable the wards are, right? It's how you talk to voters. It's how you make sure you secure a base as an elected official. So adding a coach house doesn't fundamentally change that. You just walk a couple yards, knock on a door behind. So it's clear that it's not about a density thing. It's about who is potentially going to be moving into these. And that's very much, it's about race. It's about class. Income. And they don't use those words, right? They just come up with character.
But we got some progress last week. It wasn't the bill that you wanted, but it was something.
Yep.
Are you feel good about it?
Yeah, we'll see. So I think there's a part of it where you can opt in.
Yeah. Can you kind of give me the sort of the lay of the land?
Talk
with
about
that?
what you wanted, what was in the compromise, what you wanted, what Alderman Quinn was pushing in the compromise.
So
which the last two
you
things
might need to
pretty
help
much
on the
are
curve.
I got you on this one if you
Because
want.
what started compared to what ended is just not. I'll tell you what we wanted. Citywide, everywhere in the city of Chicago, legal, done, get it over with, right? That is not what happened because people who wanted to stop it came up with different rules of affordability at first, because that's what slowed it up in the beginning. They were like, no, if you're going to build these, they have to be affordable. And I get the want to do that, but it might impede the ability to build more. But yeah.
Yeah, so quickly on that one, because it comes up all over the time. It's totally understandable. If you're thinking about it for the first time, you're like, yeah, we have an affordable housing crisis. Why don't we make sure all the new housing is affordable, right?
Character.
Sure. Well, no, but you can do a little at column A and a little at column B, right? You can say you oppose the character over here, but if you're up in Alderman Vasquez's neck of the woods, it's probably not a great talking point to say you're here for the character of the ward and you want to. Some people do, but
Yeah,
I bet
not
it-
my neighbors.
Not so much in your
Whatever.
neighborhood. No, it's easier to say make them all affordable. Well, guess what? Once you make more than 20% of them affordable, the number of affordable units that gets built goes down. Because once you break that 20% number, it's not worth it to build the units in the first place, right? So you can stop them from building the units if you say all of them have to be built at a loss to the person
Exactly.
building the units, right? And if you say, for example, like a 3-flat, if you say, yeah, we'll allow 3 flats across the city, only if they're affordable, or only if one of those 3 flats is affordable.
Or two.
Or 2.
Two are affordable. So
Yeah.
please try to make your money up with the one unit by building the other 2, and you start seeing how the math doesn't add up. And so ultimately, someone who's looking to build won't. And you actually won't see the build that you want to see, right? So even though you may have the best of intention in wanting to have the affordability, you've actually impeded the progress. And so that's what stopped it the first time. Bennett Lawson could have passed something more clearly substantially more effective than what got passed now, but the reason it got stopped the first time was because of that. And in the time that it took from that to try to move something, Marty Quinn shows up. And he came up with a whole nother curveball.
Yeah.
You're like,
And Marty Quinn is a smart guy who goes back a long way and has a lot of relationships. And kind of at the last minute, from the outside in, I got no special insight. I was telling Tom earlier, I try to figure out what happened and what went wrong. I can't tell you where this is going. But he came in with a demand that functionally union labor be used to construct all of these ADUs. Right? Now, I'm really pro-labor. This room is really pro-labor. But guess what you don't need organized labor to build? Single-family homes without an ADU, right? So there's this special requirement for organized labor to build an ADU. And by the way, there is no indication any contractor in the city right now works with organized labor to build those little ADUs.
so part of what was built in there was creating an apprenticeship program to then build it, and also to rehab the existing basements, right? So the thing is, because we're all pro-union, clearly, right, every member of city council, once that gets put on the plate, it's like, well, now I've got to find a way to support this because the union, we want union labor, we want people to have the benefits, and the folks that are doing this work to be compensated fairly. But then you have to take into account what that cost is going to look like, even just to rehab a unit. So ultimately, what ended up happening was a compromise where if you're doing a coach house or a new build, that would be the apprenticeship labor program. But if you're just rehabbing a basement to bring it online, it would not have the same standard. And so that led to some level of compromise that then led to, I think, 30 plus votes on it. That's what ultimately got over the hump.
Yeah. And now we'll see.
Oh, and there's an opt-in part.
Yeah.
So I forgot that. So like, if you still want your character, you don't got to do anything. But if you want to make sure that you're a part of the actual expansion, you have to write legislation to pass it. So something that we're looking to do is, I'm proposing is an omnibus, where you just have everybody who wants to do it at once, which has a sticky factor to it. Of like, hey, if you want to do it solo, now you're worried your neighbors might be upset, but let's just get everybody together at once, introduce the whole thing and pass it, because you might get more alders that are inclined to do so than if they had to do it solo. And so we're going to see if that's possible.
How many are interested in joining that coalition?
Well, I think it's part of the process is you got to go talk to all 50 and kind of like gauge it out, right? Because there's going to be folks who are hesitant and they're worried about concern.
Quinn.
Yeah. I mean,
49.
That's the thing. We had enough to pass it, but you could imagine there's folks who voted to pass it who are like, yeah, but I'm not going to do it, you know? So it's trying to figure out what that share can look like to continue expanding it. And right now there's been a pilot. Like 40th Ward has been part of the pilot since it started. But bringing more people on is part of the goal.
Is there any hope in building on that success? I mean, once you have that western corridor and once you have ADUs going in your ward without the sky falling, will that help?
I hope so. Like, you actually named it perfectly. We did all that and the sky didn't fall. They weren't building immediately, all these skyscrapers on Western. But that fear is palpable even if it's not existing or not justified. And so I need more education to neighbors, right? Like sometimes what we do is we'll do a zoning change and they'll go, I can't believe you did a 6th floor thing next to my 3rd floor. And I was like, okay, well, we could either do one big thing or we can proactively upzone your whole neighborhood so you can do 3 flats and make it kind of even out. But it takes a lot of education and awareness to get people to wrap their heads around it.
I would say all of that is true. This is still a slog. This is why these sorts of conversations are really important because, one, overall, the numbers say that people probably want more housing across the board, but you have to make the hand-to-hand combat conversations word by word. But in addition to the success of Western, it's inspired other efforts by other alders. So in particular, Broadway is going through a similar exercise for upzoning. Alderwoman Lenny Hoppenworth has been really brave about facing down some organized opposition in our ward and saying, hey, the surveys from people in my ward say they want it. The overall engagement says they want it. Folks who are working 2 jobs or taking care of kids after, kids after school may not be showing up to all these meetings, but there's support for this. And so that's another, that's a version of some of this that's building on the work that started on Western.
Yeah, I think part of the thing I wish people would understand is, first, property taxes don't go down. I think we all understand that. But, I know, shocker. I was going to work on that for you. But you can lessen the degree with which they rise because you're sharing it with all the other units that people own. So the more property you have online, you're helping impede the way it rises so quickly. But if you don't do that, you're skyrocketing it as well. So, for example, what's occurred, and this is the opposite, right? You'll see somebody tear down a 2-3 flat and build a single-family home that's like $1 million plus. Now you just jacked up the property value on that whole block. And now that's jacked up the property taxes on the whole block. And now that's jacked up the property rent on the whole block. And so literally just the fact that one person downzoned for one single-family only property is causing that. And neighbors don't seem to get that. So when Alderwoman Hoppenworth is doing it in Broadway, the neighbors are like, no, because if you do that, it's going to raise our taxes. And it's like, the math ain't mathing, my friend. And I don't know how we're going to get people to really understand that.
The other thing is you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If the change would lower people's property values, well, we can't have that. That's terrible. You're going to hurt my core piece of savings. You're going to hurt my home value. Like, what are we doing? Right? If the change might raise people's property values, you're going to raise my property taxes. This is going to be terrible. I'm not going to be able to afford to live in my home. Right?
Yes.
And then any change becomes a reason not to do something that welcomes more Chicagoans and expands our property tax base and lowers housing costs.
We did want to talk a little bit more about property taxes and the impact of this whole housing conversation. If I understood the Tribune article from last week about assessments going up significantly on the south and west sides, part of that is the cyclical reassessment, but it also appears that because there are a lot of vacant properties and foreclosed properties that are still boarded up, vacant lots where property's been turned down, that because the property tax system is what you said earlier, that there's a total number the property taxes have to raise, and it's divided by all the properties that pay property tax. So does this not impact the south and west side when they have so much vacant property that they have to make up some of the difference, or is it spread citywide? I'm not clear about that. But clearly vacant lots and boarded up property does hurt everyone, whether you live next door to them or not.
I think it does, but maybe not exactly in that way. So, for example, like there's also the shift between commercial and residential, which is a bigger impact, right? Your commercials have more weight politically, so they're able to kind of shift off some of their assessment. Now the residential's taking on more, and so that becomes a fight. I think the part that you highlight about parts of town that have the vacant lots are such a larger problem to address. Because if they had properties that were built there, even at market rate, they would be able to absorb it. But because those communities, I mean, we know there's reasons why highways were built the way they were to divide parts of town, right? And why trains aren't able to access certain parts of town. It was clearly racist and segregationist, even here in the inception of this city. And now we're still bearing the rotten fruit from it. You can't build there because no one could live there and then try to get to work or get to where they can get groceries. But it's there. It's like perfect like brownfield to be able to build on. But you got to find ways to incentivize people to do so.
And the other piece of this that we haven't talked about yet as much, but is an important part of the conversation in Chicago, is there are parts of the city with red hot demand that look like San Francisco or Brooklyn or Manhattan, right? A lot of those are on the north side. Some of that is migrating to other parts of the city. There are other parts of the city where there isn't that same demand, right? Home prices aren't going for that much, rents aren't going for that much. And that means that if you have a vacant lot, it's harder to justify building new market rate units on that plot of land. And we desperately need new market rate units on those plots of land. We need them for safety, we need them for a sense of community, we need them for our tax base. But if we can't figure out how to help control some of the costs of building those market rate units, it's going to make it a lot harder to support the investment that communities desperately deserve across parts of the city that
Plus,
aren't getting
you name cities and parts of town that'll reflect. Brooklyn does not look like Brooklyn 20 years ago. Wicker Park does not look like Wicker Park 20 years ago. Logan Square doesn't look like Logan Square 10 years ago, right? Because it's all so condensed and turned over because the cost keeps getting higher, people keep getting priced out, and because there's no housing in other parts of town to actually move to, and people largely don't, they're leaving the city. So you're losing population at that point, which leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy of a property tax that doesn't pay the deficit that you've already got as a city. And so it leads to public safety issues, it leads to everything. And it is at the core of how you can solve the problem, is really trying to get that build going everywhere.
So one of the problems that you mentioned is building and cost. And Richard, you've written about this, and I know you're aware of it. $747,000 per unit to build in Chicago is the average. Compare that to Houston.
So to be clear, that's not the average just to build a unit in Chicago. The average to build a unit in Chicago is probably half or two-thirds of that. Andre will know this better, frankly. But
That's right.
that is the cost to build an affordable unit in Chicago.
That's the cost for government to build the affordable
City
Right,
units.
so
City
that
Center.
is the cost.
Right.
Good, thank you. That is the cost for the city to say, hey, we're going to put a bunch of federal tax credit money into a deal in order to make the math such that this unit can get built.
And also to be clear, because this never gets clarified, out of that 800,000, 700,000, that's not all city money, right? That's government money. So you've got city, state, federal that make up a part of that, but the cost of building it is that. And we as a city, I believe, don't do a good enough job to parse that out. So everyone thinks like, great, city, you're spending that much per unit, when it's like, it's not as clear cut.
I'm not sure that gets us off the hook at all, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah, I want to hear this. I want to hear
Because
this.
we're getting a pot of money from the federal government that's pretty fixed year over year for LIHTC dollars.
And we're directing it.
Right, and
That's
we're
fair.
directing it. So even though it's like my mom's money, if I'm only using my mom's money on one deal instead of using my mom's money to make 5 deals pencil, that's on me.
Yeah, that's
kind
real.
of thing.
That's real.
So
That's fair.
driving the cost down matters because we get more units if we drive the cost down.
And
It's
I
not
like-
like we're burning taxpayer dollars.
And I'd like to add that counting on federal dollars for our city for anything right now is not a good idea. So if we could build
That's-
this for a third less and not need the federal money, we can't let this administration paralyze our affordable housing plan because Trump decides to pull the money. As soon as he hears our show,
No.
he's going to take it away.
That's right. But then the challenge becomes, and this is something that's real, it's like the building code itself. Meaning a lot of the things that lead to cost are what the code is to provide safety, right? And some of them may be outdated and need to be revamped, but they
Maybe.
kind of are there. The other is what labor you're paying for to get it done, right? Which is why union labor is going to cost more, because the people doing it are getting the benefits. So like that becomes a challenge too, is figuring out the balance of all of the above to get something built.
So I mentioned Houston, so round number $750K for city-sponsored build in Chicago. It's more than, it's half that, less than half that to do city-sponsored builds in Houston, which is the next largest city to Chicago. So what are they getting that we're not getting?
Well, first, they're getting a lot more housing out of it. That's the most important thing to think about. If the goal of an this is true all over the place. If the goal of your lead service line reduction program is to get rid of lead service lines, you should think about how many lead service lines are getting out of the ground per dollar, right? Or how many dollars per lead service line. Same thing with the housing. But one of the most important things that Houston does actually isn't. There are things we will always want to do correctly and appropriately that will cost more. We want workers to be paid decent wages. We want safe buildings. We're going to have higher environmental standards than Texas will, and that's probably a good thing.
Guaranteed.
We should, right? But the other thing that Texas does is they say, hey, here are the basic standards, minimum standards for a quality, decent place to live, right? Now you're going to get points based on how much it costs if you add on a couple of other features. And the highest scoring project on that set of points wins. You know how you get awarded dollars if you're a developer in Chicago to build affordable housing?
Afraid to ask.
Nobody knows.
Yeah, no.
Nobody knows. The people have, the developers, the affordable housing developers have to FOIA for the results and then try to do like three-dimensional math to figure out like why they won or why they didn't, what drove the choices.
Let me
That's
go back to
definitely
one
the
of
old
the
Chicago stuff, 100%.
Yup.
But one of the things Andre said, talked about regulations. I can share an experience when I, years ago, ran the League of Chicago Theaters. There was one theater license. It was expensive. It required a generator that would run for 8 hours. So if you're a little storefront theater, 8 hours, you could run matinee and evening show before you had to get out of the building. It made no sense. When we created a license for a small theater with less than 300 seats, and it relieved all this extra regulation that small theaters couldn't afford. And suddenly they're following the rules, which they couldn't do before. So a massive overhaul, it seems to me, of our regulations. If anyone's done any renovation and know what kind of conduit you're required in the city of Chicago that none of the cities around us, suburbs, require, isn't it time to really take a big look at restructuring what we require for affordable housing? I don't think any of us, as you said, both of you have said, want to give up on our union labor. But on the regulation side, there's a lot of money to be saved, right?
Yes, but government is government. That becomes challenging. Meaning, here's what I've kind of felt, is that government is a lot of people with a lot of great ideas. And they pass the idea, you put it on the desk, you move to the next idea. And so that's actually what's occurred, right? Everyone's like, well, let's do this kind of license instead. Great, they do that, I move on to the next thing. Now you just got a stack of those that are just stacking up over decades. And after a while, many of them may have been obsolete or they no longer solve the problem, but no one's ever gone back to like adjust or fix any of those things. So I think you're absolutely right. You've got to look at it all and overhaul it, but you've got to think about who would accomplish that? Because if you've got a body of 50 people, how do they hunker down and go, yes, where do we get started? So really the challenge that I see, and I don't like to put on the public, but I'm gonna, is that people elect mayors that can beat people. They don't elect people who have the skill set to manage that large of an operation, because you've got 38 different departments. Each one is like its large own corporation. You've got to be able to manage all of those things at once. But that's not what people ask about during elections. They want to know who can beat the incumbent, or who's tougher on crime, or whatever, fancy little bumper sticker is going to get them there. As opposed to, how do you manage something that big and move it forward in like 2025, 26, 27, and
Well, what about
so
the
on?
building department that has all those experts? They have the plumbers, the electricians, they have all those experts.
Do they have the
Shouldn't-
will? I mean, is
They
that
defer to the
mayor
boss.
would give them the will. They would do the work.
Well, but the issue is they defer to the boss. So even if they've all got the ideas, they go present it. A mayor's office then has to look and go, what are the priorities? So right now, the city's got a cut the tape initiative, which is effectively some of that, right? But it's looking and identifying what's your low-hanging fruit? What do you need to pass legislation to do? And then how do you convince a city council? So it's incredibly challenging to be able to manage the relationships to get that going. And again, we're not electing folks that have that kind of skill set.
So Houston is a government, and their cost is less than half of our building costs. Is it that they don't have the legacy of the Chicago way in their way, or have they figured something out that
Definitely
we
part
haven't
of it.
figured out? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's part of it, but this is not a unique, the Chicago number is bad, but the California numbers are equally horrifying. I don't know what the New York number is because I couldn't dig it up. Houston was a good, next city to look at those numbers. Of course, agree with all of the reasons. It makes more sense to throw one more line on the rules than the past. We've got someone looking at the economic disclosure rules. It's a really exciting, sexy topic about
Love it.
what you have to sign on the dotted line for. That started as like a one-page disclosure 30 years ago, and now it's hundreds of pages if you're trying to build something new. Because, hey, why don't we it would be
You
terrible.
guys forgot about this.
Yeah. It would be terrible to do business with a company that profited from slavery. It's like, has that ever stopped us from doing business with any company?
I mean, but it should, though. Just going to say that part.
Well, but this is how this snowballs. None of it is a bad idea, but when you don't recognize the trade-offs between this thing that you want and the next thing that you want and the next thing that you want, then you're in trouble. So that's why I go back, not because this is the one magic trick, but the scorecard says, hey, I got 100 points to give away. I'm going to give 20 points of those away based on how cheap I can get good housing. I'm going to give 5 points of those away based on, and all of a sudden I in the buildings department or I in the Department of Planning and Development have to be honest.
Yeah. What cracks me up is the amount of times in hearings I'm like, can you show us a rubric? Just, if you thought government was about that, literally asking people, I just need a rubric. How do you score? How do you figure out what right looks like? What are baselines? And it sounds like you're asking about foreign concepts because they're not how things have been determined. And so I think the more we keep asking for that in data, that's always been kind of the goal of our office, is to create the kind of transparency and accessibility where everyone can look up this data and go, I don't know why you guys are doing it this way. That would be helpful to us to know exactly what to target.
But the rubric says, how many units of affordable housing are you willing to give up for triple paned LEED platinum windows? There's a number. It would be great to have triple paned LEED platinum LEED windows. But how many units of affordable housing for people who desperately need it in the city of Chicago are you willing to give up? Be honest. Acknowledge the trade-off. We can debate it. We can get yelled at in the city
100%.
council hearing, right? But put that on the table and be honest about what the trade-off is, because we're talking about people who desperately need places to live, and we got 120,000 families in the city who don't have affordable housing.
And I think that's part of the challenge too, and that's what I've been seeing is there's these institutions that are fundamentally against each other. So you'll see the progressives against developers or against the realtors. And I understand the dynamics of why that's the case. But without engagement, you don't come to a solution at all. And there is very little engagement between both of those parties. So what happens is instead of talking about what a solution looks like, they're trying to ram solutions past each other to see what gets passed. And you don't end up with anything that's going to solve anything. You end up with imperfect solutions and more clutter.
Isn't a lot of this related to Ezra Klein's abundance theory? That we have all these regulations that get in our way. I'm not going to give the best interpretation of it, but he does think overregulation conflicts with our goal to have more affordable housing. It's a little bit of what Tom said at the beginning. Progressives have all these great ideas, and how do we actually make them happen? We get in our own way at some point because we want those triple pane windows because we believe in energy conservation.
Or we try to do we have a bucket of money and we're trying to solve all the problems with the bucket of money instead of the initial problem the bucket of money was set up for.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's absolutely a lot to be said, right? I think looking at it from an abundance standpoint makes sense. But there's also a lens of justice and race and class that are never coming into that equation because you're thinking about who makes those decisions about the abundance, right? Some of the things that are being moved forward are because you have people who have never been part of the decision making, never been a part of any of it, suffer from the fact that they're never provided for it. And so that's a tough balance, right? That's not triple LEED windows. It's hey, we got people who could barely pay the rent. So what are we going to do to solve that problem? And I think what's sometimes left on the table are the people that have never been brought to the table to begin with, and that becomes a much harder thing to consider. I think, yes, I agree you've got to build more, but we also have to find a way to have real deep conversations about this, and we're watching it in real time, right? while Ezra Klein's talking about abundance, you've got street vendors being detained. You got 150 people in a building. So it becomes, and then not in a building like they live there, like 150 people detained, not a place to even sleep, that it becomes very challenging to try to consider all of these different problems. Yes, the abundance, absolutely. And also, like, we got a whole bunch of people right now that we need to solve for, and that complicates it, I think, a little.
Yeah, I guess I would agree, of course, agree with that. I think the other problem is that we don't talk about development in Chicago across the city of Chicago. We talk about development in Chicago across a set of North Side wards where thoughtful, courageous alders are willing to have those difficult conversations and try to move the needle with their communities. We don't talk about it on the Northwest side or the Southwest side. And we frankly don't talk about it a lot on the South and West sides either because of some of the economic issues and the historical disinvestment that's occurred.
And also, even though we do it on the north side, the developers are like, but that's not River North. It's not Fulton Market. It's not hot, right? So even if you're willing to build and create the opportunity, we upzone the hell out of Western. It's not like they were knocking down our door, right? Because they're like, no, this isn't chic. It's not in this Chicago Magazine this month. That a lot of that status also affects where you're going to build or not. If you build everywhere, everyone's going to pay something to move somewhere, but everyone wants to get in to see if they can maximize their profit margins because this place is hot. And that's also becomes a challenge.
But I would also say, and this is a great group for this conversation in part because there's so much of the like, think locally, act nationally, understand nationally, how do we build power? The other thing that's worth, I think, noting here is that if we choose to grow Chicago and to make room for neighbors from Venezuela, make room for neighbors from the suburbs, heaven forbid, make it room for neighbors from across the country, right? But a city,
too far. That's too far. You went too far.
But a city that is growing, and just as importantly, a state that is growing, has a heck of a lot more political power and influence on the national conversation than one is shrinking.
Oh, I mean, okay, I love this. I wish the Democratic Party understood that because they can't even talk about immigration in a way. Like, anybody who came over here, if you just, hey, sign up, let's get you registered, now you're a taxpayer, the boom you'd see on your economy just by having everybody do that. So exactly what you're saying at a microcosmic level at the city, the fact that the Democratic Party itself can't envelop its arms around that kind of, like, stance is why we keep losing.
Well, and guess where they are building homes for people, right? Houston. The next redistricting, Texas is set to pick up 4 more congressional seats. Florida is set to pick up 4 more congressional seats. That's 8 more congressional votes for Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis to get to play with.
No, because there's not going to be elections. But if there were, then... Sorry, kidding.
Let's hold out hope.
Too soon.
No,
Sorry.
Let's hold out
That was
hope.
a joke.
Let's hold out hope on the elections.
There's going to be
for a second.
elections.
But you are talking about based on the new census, not the midterm redistricting.
No, I'm not the midterm redistricting.
You're talking about
We're
the
going to need
census.
another hour for the
That's
midterm
what we're
redistricting.
not talking about
No,
that, right?
I just mean for the next census.
Yes.
That's 8 electoral votes right there. Illinois is set to lose 1 or 2, depending on what we do and how we act over the next couple of years.
That's right.
We'll either give up 1 or 2 congressional seats. Now, what that means is that the blue wall of Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania ain't enough. President J.D. Vance can win re-election and lose all 3 of those states.
That was a scary sentence. I can't even.
Yeah.
Can I take this in a direction we didn't plan on? But
Did we plan on this one? No, fair.
I didn't plan on that. But the more we talk about the intransience of Chicago and the way Chicago politics works, aldermanic prerogative is really residents' prerogative, 50 little areas, fiefdoms, if you will. How much does our totally segmented city work against us? We'll have another show someday about restructuring the city council, but you've proven to me 3 or 4 times I was going to bring this up already in the conversation, and now is key. If we can't fix the affordable housing situation here, if we can't make this city more livable for people at all different levels, are the 50 wards standing in our way? Do we need fewer council members?
No, it's 3.7 million people. Right, because everyone's divided. People aren't talking to their own neighbors. They're on their phone with the algorithms reinforcing their confirmation bias. I'm right. My neighbor thinks I'm right. I don't even talk to my neighbor. So all those different opinions aren't 50 different council members. They're reflective of the 58,000 people we all represent who all don't agree with each other, right? And so I think that we have a problem with democracy, a challenge that we don't talk to each other. These smartphones, which has helped us do so much, have also limited our ability to actually connect with somebody who's right next door. And if you can't have that conversation, you're not able to talk to somebody you might disagree with. And if you're not able to talk to somebody you might disagree with, you can't figure out how to have that conversation, engage, and then find agreement. And not being able to do that as a society is ultimately what leads to the problem. But if you want to talk 50 alders, we can talk that too.
Look,
That
I don't
might be
want to
another-
talk. I don't want to talk my co-panelist out of a job here. I think he's doing
I
an
didn't
awesome
say
job.
which all
okay.
we
We'll be
don't
okay.
need.
But I
no.
do think there's a question of when we have something that benefits the city as a whole, but the costs feel super localized. How do we as a city engage with that problem and talk about that problem? And there's no one weird trick that will solve this, right? I think some of the alders getting together on corridors is part of it. But I do think there's a question of, hey, what are some land use rules and zoning rules that say, hey, we should be able to build more housing in every neighborhood of the city. You have a lot of community input about how you add that housing in those neighborhoods of the city. It matters what people see on their block and how they relate to their communities, and that input is important and valuable. But we have to recognize that this is a citywide problem that demands a citywide solution, and probably some statewide action too, if we're being honest.
I mean, yeah, I think if you created regional planners that were larger than wards, and like they made the decisions, and there were less of them, you might be able to address that specifically, right? I think there's ways to change it. I think what I was going to say about the alders is, again, these are quote unquote problems created by the public and what they wanted. Meaning, in New York, your city council members only do legislation. If that happened in Chicago, everyone would come to our office and go, why aren't you fixing this pothole? And then I'd point to them in a department. They go, what do I have you for? And then they would go to the department who had then had to address 3 million people, not just 58,000. So part of it is what the customer's been demanding. It's part of the experience, right? They want to be able to go to that office to get their thing fixed. And that's kind of led to what is a very unique position in all municipal government.
And it also puts alders and their staffs in a terrible position. You have not particularly well-funded offices of good, hardworking staffers who just want to work on citywide issues and get drowned with garbage pickup or potholes.
And then
or
you
all the
get
rest.
dorks like me who work retail and customer service their whole life, who like love all of it and still get to do legislation, right? But it's like, again, those are never the questions you get on the interview to come in. I wanted to come bring revolution. I knock on doors and find out it's about fixing potholes and tree trims. So I'm like, oh, it's a customer service job. Got it, right? But that is what government is, and it's allowed me to have the conversation with neighbors that, like, you are investors in this government. You bought it. You own it. It's yours, and you should treat it that way. And if you don't know what your employees are doing, there's some responsibility in being a part of a democracy and part of owning that government. But we don't think about it that way. So when you see me walk around with a little name tag that says alderman, you think I'm special when ultimately I'm a worker. And you have to get out of that mindset. We're not that special. Trust, I've talked to 49 of them. We're regular like everybody else. And you guys are our bosses. And you have to think about that because that's at every level of government, including the orange, rotten carrot at the White House, right? You're the boss, and you have to move as such. But a lot of people, I feel, are disillusioned with both parties, and so they just go, I'm gonna sit on the couch and look at my phone because I don't think I'm gonna get I don't think my college loan is gonna get removed, right? Yeah, unless you're those
Unless
guys.
you're a nice agent and got the bonus, right?
But
That's
what
right.
I think that's how you get a more functional democracy, and I think that's what I'm always challenged with is like neighbors want to engage, they want to learn more. Our job is to give them the 101 courses, which is I'll teach you the budget with a fidget toy on TikTok or whatever, so that you can pick it up and talk to your friend about it, because you need to. If you talk to most people in Chicago, they can't tell you who their alderperson is or what they do. You have to know that to get better service, and that's my hope, is that people learn that so you get a better city out of it.
And I think what is evident tonight is that a housing crisis, so many of these things are interrelated, is directly related to the future of democracy, and it's not overstating it even a little bit. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm afraid we're at the end of our broadcast portion, so we'll wrap this up, get your questions ready. Let me just say that Show Up Chicago is hosted by Blue Beginning Chapter of Indivisible Chicago, as well as our friends at the Hideout. If you or your friends aren't here tonight, well, you're here. If your friends aren't here tonight, want to watch this show, you'll find it on YouTube. Search for Blue Beginning. Special thanks to Katie and Tim Tutton. Jody Boltman, Avery Reel, and the terrific staff at the Hideout. Sound engineer tonight is Jonas Standerfer. John Freeberg manages our broadcasting and our recording. Thanks to Lewis University for providing additional support. And WCPT's Matt Cummings and Tim Hogan and Mark Pinsky for broadcasting the show up Chicago the following Sunday, this coming Sunday at 7 p.m. Thanks.
Andy Miles.
And Andy Miles. I forget Andy. Thanks to the Blue Beginning team, which is Marge and me and Chloe Madvig and Maureen Cool you met earlier, and Nick Rapkin and Mike Lenahan. One more big round of applause for our guests, Richard Day, Alder Andre Vasquez, and this ends our broadcast. Thank you for joining us.
And now to the Q&A. Just so everyone knows, I will hold the microphone whilst you ask your question, and I'm going to start right here. Sir, what is your name and where are you from?
Oh, hi, my name is Stu Weiss, 40th Ward. And
Stu, what's up?
hey, how you doing? So my first apartment in Chicago, this will be a short preface, was a very affordable second floor in a 3-flat. And it was one of the ways that my wife and I could start out in an affordable place that we could actually start our family in. I've seen Alderman Vasquez specifically clowning on some realtors who were promoting deconversions and talking about how this beautiful 3-flat is now a $1.7 million single-family home. Yeah. How do we incentivize? Because I don't know if you can actually prohibit it, but how can you incentivize people to keep 2- and 3-flat apartments in the city rather than doing these types of just monstrous deconversions?
That's a tough one because I can only speak from like a little bit of experience, right? Growing up, my understanding, and this is like somebody who came from an immigrant family, it's kind of how it played out, right? You get yourself a 2-3 flat because you're going to own that, and then you get older and your kids are going to be on one floor, and now your parents are getting older, you want them to move in, and so like that's kind of been the model, right? And I don't know what's changed fundamentally that doesn't have people thinking that way, right? I don't know if it's because some people are just doing really well, you know, in capitalism you got winners and losers or whatever, and maybe they're like, I just want a single family home, I don't want to figure this out. But I don't understand I would want, in any property I own, somebody who's paying rent to help cover the mortgage. I think it's just a system that's fluid. So I don't know. Like I said, I can only speak to my experience. I don't know if you've got thoughts on like what incentivizes that.
I will say, as a guy raising a family on the 3rd floor of a 3-flat right now, that's pretty affordable rent. I'm pretty invested in maintaining that as long as humanly possible. Check back in a few years on the in-laws or someone living on another family member on another floor. I mean, we'll see.
Fair.
But I don't have a great answer for you. I will say one thing is, as people get wealthier, they want more space, right? And I can't change that question. I do think there's an interesting question of if the historical model of a 2-flat is 2 floors up and 2 floors down, is there a way to change some of the code or zoning requirements such that you can get 4 bedrooms up, for example, so that it's easier to make the case for a family, right, with 2 kids to want to have 4 bedrooms up and then you're still preserving a unit down? Like, I haven't had enough conversations there, but I think it's worth asking the question, let's say you want 4 bedrooms, what can we do to make sure that you can get 4 bedrooms and you can get another unit or 2 on that property?
Well, yeah, because every time I hear 4 bedrooms, I'm like, oh, they're jacking up the price of that unit, right? So that is part of the challenge. You're also talking to a renter who lives in a coach house. Doesn't happen that often, but city council member who does all the above. Fair.
All right, let's go right here. Can you tell me your name and where you're from?
I'm Bailey. I live in Logan Square. So I didn't invent this idea, but I think one of the big problems with public participation processes for getting like zoning variances approved, especially for affordable housing, is that the biggest stakeholders, who are the people who would be able to live in that housing, don't get to participate in the process. And so I'm wondering, as an alderman, if you have any ideas for meaningful ways to engage those people, especially people who, in places like Logan Square, who have already been displaced and who don't live in the neighborhood anymore, but who might want to move back?
I'm going to be very straight up, and why that's so challenging is in my head, even as you pose the question, everyone that's already there is a 40th warder. Whoever's coming in is a 35th warder right now, right? So the brain doesn't brain that properly because you're literally thinking about the people who are going to get you out of this job. And I think that's a challenging thing. Even looking at other parts of the ward, like there's like a radius when you're doing some of these zoning changes, right? That I think for me, I've made it clear what we wanted to do coming into office, and that's increasing density, bringing the affordability. And so I think by planting that flag, I just think about what the opportunities look like. So even, there'll be stuff where it's like 50%, it's a 50 split. Some neighbors love it, some neighbors hate it. And I think that, man, we got a lot of urbanists here. They get so mad when I negotiate a compromise. I'm like, this was going to be a 2 flat. We made it 4. I know we started at 5, and they're like, how dare you lose the floor? And I don't know how to explain that part of negotiation because we ended up with more than what the neighbors who didn't want anything wanted, but it's a little bit less than we've started with. And so I think about that to add density is kind of how I navigate through it. And then I get booed or no likes or whatever on social media.
All right, next door. What is your name and where are you from? I'm gonna hold the microphone.
I'm Bo. I'm from the 27th Ward. So I felt like this question was diffusely answered, but I was hoping to focus it, which was, I feel like a big issue that people that love housing deal with is that the opposition has a narrative advantage. So they have status quo bias, nothing will change. They have tangible causality, either nothing was built or look, I got this 100% affordable building, forget all the other housing that wasn't built. Or lastly, they have historical examples that they can draw on to say, look, you don't want development. There was urban renewal. There was Hope 6. There was new highways. How do we overcome that? Because I'm not sure that the majority of the population will think as much about housing as people in this room, and we have like a big narrative hurdle to clear. I felt like I heard some examples, but...
I'm not the guy who runs for office for a living, so I'm the wrong person to answer your question. But I do think one thing that's interesting is some of the national conversation, this abundance stuff, it seeps into a lot of the brains of the folks in the 40th Ward and the folks in other parts of the city as they start to think about this. And I do think there's lots of good and some like incomplete parts of abundance. But I think one of the biggest ideas that matters there, and is not unique to abundance by any means, is this idea that we can have more. We can grow the pie. More for you does not mean less for me. There are ways.
Sounds very socialist, my friend. It's tough.
There are ways to make room for more neighbors, right? There are ways to make more space. Our schools aren't full, right?
Yeah.
Our parks aren't full, and so I don't. That's not like an immediate answer to some of those pieces, but this idea that we want to walk into conversations with open arms and growing the pie and growing our city and being a welcoming place for everybody is a powerful lever in parts of the city that are having some of the most difficult fights around development right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a person who ran for office, thank you for that. So I think I'll say it as a retail person and salesperson. Your job isn't about narrative. It's about listening to people to find out what they want. And so when you're dumping theory and like development and like, look, I'm an urbanist and like, that's not going to resonate with a person who's like, hey man, I'm just trying to get my groceries. And so I think finding ways to engage, to identify what people want to see and what people might be more averse to is like a good way to start. Like, I think when I started mentioning about the taxes, right, and how higher it gets, that hits everybody. Because they're like, I'm not trying to pay more. I'm having a hard enough time to survive now. That thinking about that reality, and if you want to help yourself out, you actually need more density to absorb what that levy is going to be, is actually the way I talk about it to most of the neighbors. And so it does resonate because I'm like, you've seen that house that just got built right down the block. Like, what do your taxes look like now? That I think sometimes just having those very real conversations and hearing people out is actually the first step, because when it comes to urbanist and planning theory, you're talking to people you already have. You're not gaining new people. And so you've got to listen to people to understand how best to address what their concerns are and speak to them in a way where they're absorbing what you're saying.
What is your name? Where are you from?
Hey, I'm Michael. I'm from Lakeview. So I have a question for everybody, which is, do you ride CTA? Yeah, everyone? So later...
How often's a different question.
Right.
Yeah.
So soon they're going to be facing this huge budget deficit. And part of that is because they don't have enough ridership. If we built more homes around transit, we would have more ridership. So I have a question maybe more for rich, which is like at the state level, they're so far removed from a lot of these local kind of knife fights of like, oh, we want to build a 4-flat in Andersonville. Everyone light up Andre and like go yell at him. But they don't do the same thing for the state level reps. So what can the state do to boost ridership and then also housing?
So, and I really would love to get your opinion on this in a bunch of ways too, frankly. It's like a rule that the farther up you go, like the wider the geographic area, the more supportive elected officials will be for building more housing, right? And this is true on the right and the left. Like Elizabeth Warren totally gets it, wants to build across the country, right? Like it's not it's not just a right versus left thing. Like you could pick your enemies at any level. That's half of politics, right? But there's a very clear understanding that the higher, if it's just the block, that's the hardest fight in the world. If it's across the country, that's the easiest, clearest to understand. So there were two important bills in Springfield last session, one of which that would have done ADUs statewide, and the other which would have said, not so much for all of Chicago, you can build 2 and 3 and 4 flats on bigger lots. One, that would have been amazing because it would have meant that Andre doesn't get in a knife fight every time he tries to build a 2-flat near transit. But two, the biggest undefeated boss in this problem is not the city of Chicago. It's the suburbs, right? Like, as hard as this is going to be in Chicago, good luck doing it in Winnetka or Hinsdale or one of those Rolling Meadows or one of those places that might exist because it's on a map. But yeah, the point is that those will always be even harder, and you're never going to build massive courtyard apartments in some of those places. But having legislation at the state level to set some minimum supportive floors on that to allow a base level of building would make an enormous difference. Unfortunately, both of those bills failed in the last round, but I think that's one of the most important parts of making progress going forward.
Yes. I started cracking up when you were talking about the different levels of government, because it's like they're all further removed from the ground. We're the ones right there. So I was talking to somebody about what it's like in state government. And I was like, it's great. You guys pass something and they get the victory lap. They never see how long it actually took to get there. They're not in the weeds on what it took to pass something. They're not in city government. You sneeze, somebody's angry that you did the thing, right? Because they're watching every single decision you're making, and they're that critical at the municipal level. So you're absolutely right. The further removed you are from it, the more you can talk about your values and then just celebrate something that you passed, because no one's really in the weeds on how it's moving. And it's at the congressional level, people are just like, can you just yell at somebody or do something? Because I don't see you guys passing much of anything. So it's challenging.
What is your name? Where are you from?
Hi, my name is Lee Foley. I am a 20th Ward resident, so Woodlawn, biked up here from the south side. And so I am one of those people who owns one of those vacant lots on the south side. I own a 2-flat. I am also a first-generation 6-figure earner, which means that I don't come from wealth. In an attempt to build an ADU in my 2-flat or build a 3-unit on my vacant lot, I don't want to be over-leveraged trying to solve the city's problem of disinvestment. What are the resources that you all are proposing in ADU bills or any new construction bills, or the ideas that you believe need to be used to help someone like me?
I would be not honest if I said we got a whole laundry list of that, right? Some of those challenges, and I'll just speak from my standpoint, right? It's different than the problems I'm seeing that I'm addressing on a day-to-day, right? So it's more a conversation for me with Jeanette, right? And go hey, what are you seeing? How do you figure out ways to address it? I think, some of the bond money that we had voted on to try to figure out affordable housing might be moved in that direction, but I don't know that anyone's actually looking at how to create and solve for those problems that are very particular ones. So I think the best thing I could do for you, if I'm me, is give you my cell phone number so I could follow up. It's 773-999-7269. I'm happy to repeat it. No, legit, because I would take that, go back to our colleagues and go all right, what do we do in this situation? And really figure out what solutions we currently have or what you can come up with. Because we want to incentivize more of that build and not people to feel like they shouldn't take that step because they're going to walk into bigger debt and bigger challenges and problems if they do.
There's also Stephen Vance is in the room who might have a good idea of specifically what might be available in Woodlawn. Okay, all right. Well, I'm not. You guys know each other. Cool.
We talked already.
But no, I think the other thing, though, that's challenging is who is left out of the conversation when we add one more rule about what it's going to cost to build a 3-flat, right? Who is not part of the conversation when it says, oh, well, no, you need to not just do a remediation study, but you need to pull this, that, and the other thing out of the ground in order for this to work. Oh, no, you're going to need to have 2 stairs for that building, right, if it's more than 2 units, because someone in the fire department told me once it would make their life easier downtown, right? And so, no, like, in part because some of those alders who are great alders have not been part of those conversations for a while. They are both less equipped to help you and less equipped to advocate for faster, lower cost development at City Hall.
I was going to say something that made me think about was like, I don't know what city it is where you get like the automatic how-to models of what to build, where it's like, here, just do this thing. And I imagine it would be so much easier than trying to come up with a concept and move it through the process we have here at the city, right? It feels like, hey, here's the paint by number version of like what you want to build if it's a 2-flat, and then just get that thing going. I'd imagine it would be so much faster than what we have going on.
This is an unnamed member of city government who I like and respect in a lot of other ways, was working on some version of a pattern book, which would be some versions of those. Wouldn't actually come with building department approval. You couldn't just build to it and then be good. And this individual told me, we don't want to have, quote, cookie cutter development. And I'm sitting there saying, 1, I'll take development in wards and neighborhoods that don't. And 2, you know what we called cookie cutter development 70 years ago? Bungalows. 2 flats.
Legit.
3 flats. It's like this goes back to your priorities. What matters more? Investment in a community, housing for people who need it, or it looking really good when the plans go down to City Hall so you can feel good about it?
You know what looks really good? Actually, something getting built. 100%. That makes no sense to even hear out loud.
We didn't ask you this during our Q&A, but I'm going to insert real quickly because Ed Keegan, the Tribune architecture critic, wrote recently a complaint that affordable housing wasn't as creative or contemporary as it ought to be, and he didn't like the way it looks.
Has Ed Keegan ever waited on a wait list to get an affordable unit?
There you go.
Also, like,
all right.
get your privilege standards of what you think pretty looks like. I think anybody that has a place to live would be happy they've got a place to live. So how about building the thing first, then figuring out the, dressing on it if you want later. Like, it's just very elitist.
And the part that makes me most angry about this is not about, like, is the unit safe, right? This isn't about, like, does the unit, right, the basics. This is like, do I like the look of the unit that was built for someone who desperately needs a place to live?
And such subjective standards. Like, who decides what pretty is? Like, whatever. It's a dumb argument. Sorry. No, it was good. It got that out of us.
Yep. Tell us how you really feel. One more question, I think.
What is your name? Where are you from?
Hi, my name is Mark Child. I'm in the 40th Ward. Hi, Andre.
What up? I mean, hello.
How do you do? I guess my general question would be, so before moving into the 40th Ward, I lived in the 46th Ward, which several years ago with the previous alderman, very contentious discussion, shout out to anyone who's on our Chicago, where people often debate about whether or not they want to be landlords. And there's one of the biggest contentions I remember from that time was a lot of the alderman's opponents, including the current alderman, would come out and talk about how, this ward has so much affordable housing, and the other places, the other wards, they have so little. So they got to pick up the pace, and we've got to, like, expand and build up. And I've heard a lot of people on both ends of that argument ask things like, well, we want to make sure that we want to hold on to the affordable housing we have. And other people are like, well, I want to see the development because that raises my property value, that I can rent my place out and go move somewhere else. So I'm curious to know, is this an issue that's going on like in the other wards where they are contentious about this, or?
I mean,
I hope that makes sense.
yeah, it does. I think from my vantage point, right, having to interact with all the neighbors, yes. Like, it feels like every single decision gets contentious. Like, people want to afford where they live, right? Everyone wants. Who does not want affordability, please? Right? But that means different things to different people, right? If you're living in a house that you bought, you want to make sure you can continue living in it. You want to make sure that it's gaining in value, so later on when you retire, you can actually see the fruits of that, right? And you have people just want to find a place to live in an area that feels like it's not affordable to them. So these are always very contentious issues, and trying to navigate through that and have those conversations are actually the crux of the problem. We all want the affordability. How we get there is a question mark for everybody, and those conversations and trying to resolve those are how we can find solutions.
Yeah, all of that is right. It goes to another version of, like, if it goes up too fast, this is bad because your property taxes go up. If it goes down, it's bad because your home value goes down. One other thing, though, and this is the hardest part, I think, sometimes for folks to capture at the grassroots level, it's not going to change anybody's mind in the broad, grand scheme of things, but I think it's important to understand in this room, is we've known for a long time that if we built 50,000 more units of housing in Chicago, it would be a little bit more affordable. But there are also really good studies now that say that if the alderman approves a 25-unit building, or the alderman approves more units in the 40th ward, the neighborhood around the 40th ward, that area, that 2-mile radius, will get more affordable. Not like crazy more affordable, changes the whole game, but at the margin, creating more supply in a localized area, even if it's new housing, will increase the affordability of that area a little bit. And that's a really hard thing to see and say, because you see something shiny and glassy and expensive that goes up, and you're like, what's in it for me? But explaining and communicating that creates more options and more leverage for renters is an important part of the
Yeah, I mean, it increases mobility, right? Somebody who can afford that bigger unit goes to that bigger unit, which then opens up the other unit. Now somebody can move into that unit, right? So all those things occur. It's just, there's a quote from Harry Osterman that is the one that I am always going to carry with me. Because he said it to me one day, and I was like, that sounds funny, but like, that's so real. Is that everyone wants progress, but nobody likes change. So good luck, right? Good luck. You want to see your roads fixed, but you don't want to see your roads fixed, because you got to wait for that. So it's like, I don't know what to do with that, but it's absolutely a reality that we have to navigate through.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. What a great show.
And I want to thank TJ Shanoff, tickling the ivories over there.